Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the social solipsist, and it is now October. So, we're going to watch a series of movies on the more morbid and spooky side. And this week, I decided to watch Death Becomes Her from 1992. Now, I had never actually heard of this film before. I don't know how extensively well known it is. I came to it in passing as somebody mentioned it and gave it a couple of noteworthy accolades. And so I decided, okay, this looks kind of fun and easy. Let's check it out. So, it's an interesting movie. I don't know if it has aged super well, but I kind of like it. It's charming. The movie is not very deep. I don't necessarily mean that as a diss either. Sometimes the best movies aren't that deep and their core concepts are incredibly simple and can be summed up in a sentence. And the core concept for this movie is basically, if you were a narcissist in a field that encourages narcissism, how far would you go and to what levels of absurdity would you stoop to maintain your livelihood and your narcissism and keep yourself in the way that you have always expected yourself to be? It's an interesting concept, and it's interesting how it unfolds because at the beginning it seems to be relatively low key. And it slowly, over the course of the film, slips into progressively more absurdity and silliness. And I think that it honestly does that pretty deftly. However, I'm not necessarily sure I love how it gets there all the time, or the choices that were made in terms of what is given the most narrative importance. This does not look at first glance like it's going to be as kind of over the top as something like Beetlejuice or any number of other sort of, semi-absurdist, cheesy, over-the-top comedy horror things. But it definitely fits in sort of that same vein. And I was a little surprised by that because, like I said, it sort of, at the beginning, gives you the idea that things are a little bit supernatural, but not necessarily telling you how that's going to go. So, unfortunately, in my feeling, the silliness and the cheesiness and the comedy aspects of it, they don't have to do this, but in this case, they have put all of the interesting social interrogation elements very much in the back burner. And I think if it had been upfront from the start, like something like Beetlejuice, to say, this is what we're doing, we're going sort of full ridiculous, it's totally okay, just you're along for the ride, I think I wouldn't have had those expectations. And in fairness, this is a very subjective feeling on it, but I felt like the movie started to interrogate some interesting, if not particularly deep or like questions about sort of looking at the farce that is certain elements of our culture. I'm dancing around this too much and I'm making this not make any sense. It looks at fame and fortune and the importance of appearance when it comes to acting and performing, and takes them along to an absurd level that is funny, but loses its meaning in the process. And this is particularly interesting because both of the leads, Goldie Hawn and Meryl Streep, have been known at some points in their careers as being incredibly beautiful, attractive women. And Hollywood, as it is wont to do, more so in the 90s than now, but still plenty now, loves to discard women once they're about in their 30s. They're no longer attractive. And I think I saw an interview at some point of Meryl Streep. I feel like I've seen multiple actresses talk about this particular issue of just at some point walking into their agent's office and realizing that they were being booked as like witches and mothers and old crones, and they were not particularly old and certainly had not lost all elements of their beauty. And so having heard Meryl Streep talk about that before, it stuck in my mind as I was watching this, that having her play this character who is so obsessed with her appearance and so high and mighty and cruel to other people who she sees as in her way and lower than her, in contrast to Meryl Streep, the real person, who seems to be an incredibly pleasant and polite person and has a very good reputation and has specifically told these stories about, feeling like she didn't deserve that kind of disrespect, but, it gets to you. That stuck in my mind. And I don't know if that was necessarily in the minds of the casting directors when they did this. But it's relevant. It's always relevant. Art is always recontextualized in every passing moment by the things that surround it. So I feel like it was a valid thing to look at, and I think it deepens it at least deepened the movie for me. Unfortunately, it jumps away from actually taking a hard look at not necessarily having character growth for a character like that, but telling some sort of story about like what are the ramifications of and you could go to the absurd level with this without losing the plot entirely. What happens when you are so willing to sacrifice other people or do questionably moral things in order to get what you want, especially over something that to an outsider seems like it would be incredibly trivial and completely unnecessary and especially absurd given that. Unfortunately, it doesn't really do that. The second half of the film basically goes to full comedy, dark comedy, not like laugh out loud so much, of just the absurdity of what has happened, and it gets kind of slapsticky. Now, ultimately, it ends in a place that I think works. I was ultimately pretty happy with the time I spent, and it moves at a solid clip, being under 2 hours. I think it's an hour and 45-ish. And I think pacing-wise, it doesn't overstay its welcome in that regard. So even if it wasn't exactly what I was looking for, I think it does pretty well. What's interesting is that I say that a lot. Anyway, noticing your own vocal quirks in your own recording. I should cut this out, but I won't. So talking about the actual production of this, with this latter half of the film that is getting more towards the absurd and more towards the slapstick and more towards this physical comedy aspect, there is a a lot more visual effects work that goes into the latter half of the film. And at the time, and even now, it sometimes gets a lot of credit. And while it is not bad, I don't think it deserves the level of accolade that it gets. This was 92, and the budget for this was not that small. So this movie was made in 1992 for $55 million. And in 1993, for $63 million, they made Jurassic Park. Now, I will concede that's not a very fair comparison because of a whole bunch of things related to the background behind the special effects and the specialties of the people involved and so on and so forth. But the special effects in this movie do not hold up. I'm going to be frank about it. With a few exceptions, both the digital editing and the props and animatronics and things that are used, they look sloppy. And they look very fake, and some of for a movie that is spending so much time talking about the like beauty versus ugliness and old versus young and all these other things, some of the effects are really well done. The core makeup work is actually really well done, and well, for the most part. But like, you've got fat suits that look bad, you've got prosthetics that look bad, you've got like just general like skin and scarring modifications that just look cheap. And then there's all of the digital effects, which, I mean, like, they're not the worst thing I've ever seen by any means. But, like, it's just like, oh, man, you guys couldn't line up that green screen insert a little bit better so that it doesn't look like this offset camera shot doesn't make the person's neck look broken when it's not supposed to be. It's just very weird. So it's a mixed bag. There are some things that age really poorly, and unfortunately the things that don't age poorly and are actually pretty all right are not so great by comparison to offset them. Because now that I'm like reflecting on all of the things I'm going through, I'm going, oh, that one was okay, and that one was okay, and that one was okay. But none of them really wowed me. And because the latter half of the film is very reliant on that production element, having it be as sloppy as it is sometimes, or kind of cheap seeming, is a downer. So, yeah. Beyond that, I kind of wish they had done more with the visuals, the visual stylings, and the some of the color grading and like contrasting shots, because they do some of it, where you have shots that are very dark, shots that are very gray, shots that are very light, shots that are very colorful, but not as much as I wanted them to. Not as much, not unless you were looking for it. I don't think any of it would necessarily stand out to you as being particularly fantastic in that regard. And so I wanted them to lean into the sort of absurd visuals, the oversaturation, both literal and figurative, and to rely on that to give more life to the world. Because ultimately, no pun intended, the world feels a little bit dead. This is directed by Robert Zemeckis, who is has had a long and storied career in Hollywood since the 70s at least, and I think he's still directing things today. And I don't know off the top of my head what I've seen of his that I do really like or don't really like. One second. I'm actually looking it up right now. Oh no. I forgot. I forgot he wrote, directed, and produced The Polar Express. Never mind, it all lines up. Oh, that's not fair. That's a particularly bad thing on his filmography. There are plenty of things in there that are pretty solid, like Back to the Future. And wow, he did Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which I actually was thinking about when I was reflecting on this film, because Who Framed Roger Rabbit does so many of the things right that this movie does poorly or wrong. Um, I wow that's taken me aback for a moment. Um, yeah. Who Framed Roger Rabbit 4 years before this, and it is unbelievably better than this in every regard. It's a truly impressive feat of cinematography. Yeah, I don't have a really strong positive or negative feeling about Zemeckis. Having some of the things on here are feathers in his cap, and some of them are, I don't know, what's the opposite of a feather in your cap? Uh, toilet paper on your shoe? Sure, we'll go with that. uh, um, it just, with some of his filmography, I would expect better, and with some of it, I would expect worse. In general, I think it's mostly serviceable. It doesn't the cinematography, the direction choices don't particularly get in the way of the production, but mostly they don't wow me either, and it's sort of fine. As far as some of the other production factors, obviously the casting is quite good. I think Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn play off each other really well. Bruce Willis is actually who I do not give compliments to very easily, because for a bunch of reasons he's not a very good actor. This actually might show the most range I've ever seen him give in anything. Is it great acting? No, but it's different than his usual, and you know what? That's enough, because I think he fills the role really well. And as far as the like music and sound editing, it's a very 90s sounding film. And I do mean that as a compliment. There's an element of the editing and an element of the sound effects production that's done, and the music that is set behind it, that all works pretty well, but definitely places it in a certain time and place. Beyond that, it's hard to dig too much at this film, because it's not trying to be particularly highbrow. It knows that it's a little bit silly and a little bit over the top, and that it's not trying to say too much. And honestly, this could have swung the other way. While I would have liked to see more from this film, it could have swung the other way and become like a real downer by digging in too much, either becoming not funny or just sort of depressing in the background while it's trying to be funny. So in that respect, I guess I have to respect what they've done. Anyway, this one's interesting. It's in the theme of the season. It's not too gruesome, not too like, I was a little worried there was going to be more like really kind of painful body horror. That is something I tend to shy away from, but it's pretty judicious with the things that it does, and it all rounds out to a solid kind of okay film. And if you're just looking for something easy to watch to throw on during your Halloween party or whatever, I think it's a pretty solid watch in that regard. Anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been your host, the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time.